Self-introductions, and once again, I want to thank you for being here. That's real dedication. We had a half a day a week ago, and a big part of our meeting today is to talk about what happened a week ago and to kind of do a hot wash and figure out what's next in terms of creating awareness, education, project development. Hi, Tim. So let's start around the room, and then we'll jump to the phone and see how who's here with us, and I'm sure there'll be some other people jumping on and walking through the door as time goes on. Cesar?
Cesar Perez with Impulse Advanced Communications.
John Proctor, Sandoval City Council.
Drake Hayward, Water Einstein.
George Amendola, telecommunications entrepreneur.
Paul Cheney, Cuyama Community Services District.
And Bob Allen, KDTV.com.
And Bill Simmons, I'm with the consortia. On the phone.
Jim Williams, Physical West.
Hi, Tim.
Lexi Smith, Geolink.
Lexi.
Hayden Awan, Studio 2000.
Hi, Hader.
King Fang, Cosmonaut Business Roundtable. Jory Wolf, Magellan Advisors.
Hi, Jory.
Morning.
Oh, we have a quorum. That's a pretty comfortable number considering our big event we had last week. That's not bad at all. So why don't we, I'm got the slides up. You may have the slides as well in terms of what you're looking at off the announcement. In terms of today's agenda, I'm expecting a shorter meeting. Wanted to try to keep it closer to an hour, hour and 15, 9:30, 9:45 adjournment. We will talk quite a bit, I think, about the summit. And then I want to just update you on some of the discussions happening with Caltrans and talk a little bit about what's happening with the cities. Would like to have Paul tell us a little bit more about his learning experience in a little area of Cuyama. It's one of the hard spots for our Tri-County region, and we've talked about it a lot. Now we've got somebody we can actually work with and work alongside and maybe support, and that's exciting. I want to talk a little bit about the Anchor Institution Regional Network. Maybe Jory can provide us an update, some of his thinking since last week, and then roundtable, and we'll try to get out of here and make it have a shorter meeting, not all the way to 10 o'clock. So with that, let's go on to the first topic. First impressions in terms of what you heard after a week you've had a time to stew on it and think about it, and some of the comments from the people that presented. How can we do better this next year? And I feel like we really turn and burn for 3 or 4 months to get the presentation ready, and maybe the time for the next one to start is right now. You know, if we talked about transportation, you know, what are we going to talk about next year, and what kind of speakers do we want to line up, and maybe we can go there and think about that a little bit, and then any overall takeaways. So I'll open it up with that. Just general thoughts that you had. Sorry we didn't give you more time, John. You were kind of, I thought your impression, your presentation was right on, okay, but you had it condensed.
Yeah, I was very conscious of that as I was doing it, so if I came off as apologetic, that's, hope not. Yeah, I think my comment kind of goes to that, not just because of me. The problem we have is there's so many interesting topics, but would it be better to have fewer topics, more time on each? But it seemed like there was a good flow to it too. I mean, having these different topics. So.
The speakers were great. You know, the thing that maybe we could do for next time is a more clear call to actions at the end of it, and maybe a toolkit or some sort of guidance to be able to accomplish those calls to action. We put a lot of good things out there, but I think a synopsis or something that really reiterated what was said and what the directions are and what our aspirations are would make it clear for everybody.
And I think if I could add in, the comment was made that there was a lot of different things involved in there. Is there a need for only one summit a year? In other words, could we have the one thing that's changing for sure is technology. And something could happen where we might wanna have a summit on a certain particular, project.
That's an interesting thought.
I agree with that thought. I think summits are good when it comes to introducing new topics to get people to agree need to be worked on. Or to inform them about progress which is taking place on a particular topic that's been presented at a previous summit, and you keep the team going until you think that you've got enough momentum. A summit really, I think the next one would be, I think it'd be great if the next one could showcase the results of work that's being done by the local municipalities and the county, and possibly detail work that has been done, but most importantly the successes and maybe even the failures for that matter, and how to approach this so that everyone can learn from what took place in the trenches, rather than this high-level thinking, trying to encourage people to take the first step forward, give them really more understanding of how to start getting it done.
Good point.
Yeah, I would double down on that comment. I think it seemed like the audience was the municipalities for the most part, right? It was a lot of education, especially in the first half, with what a city could look like and what a city should be, and what all of these technologies that are coming down that they all need to be ready for. But there wasn't a blueprint for what do I do next, or what am I supposed to do, or what are the models that are existing out there that have done this well. I thought Jory's presentation was, touched on that, but maybe the focus should be, look, this is how it's done. Maybe there isn't a blueprint yet, right? But if there is something, I think that's what you want them to go away with, is there is a way to do this. I've seen it. That's how I can go back and bring that message to my constituents.
The first step in this transformation really is for city council folks and city managers. The problem with rice bowls, you got a public works guy, you got an IT guy,
right.
and you got a planner over here. I mean, it's really, really hard. And in terms, and what you've had to go through it, and what Jory goes through in all these areas. I mean, until you get everybody, and maybe we haven't spent enough time on that. It's just, how do you get these rice bowls working together? Somebody wants to go and do a dig once. Well, the IT guy said, well, that's public works. That's not my job.
Yeah.
But yet it is, in terms of what the network's all about with dig once. And so I think we've just scratched the surface there.
That's a great point.
And maybe that needs to be something that we really figure out how to move to the front burner, is working across rice bowls,
Workshops and skills, how to do that, right?
Yeah.
With those people in the room, that would be interesting.
And this is one of those things that you gotta do it. I mean, this isn't an option. I mean, the only way you're gonna accomplish this is when you figure out how to get people talking to each other and recognize that this new infrastructure is something that's gonna be managed by multiple groups and planned by multiple groups. And,
Yeah, I think there might be a value to start laying out a program, and I think we can start with a program and say, okay, we need a breakout session on governance. We need something on GIS and how GIS is important for collecting the data and understanding your assets going forward and managing the infrastructure after you built it or brought it together through a P3. The next one would be models, business models. The next one would be financing the effort. How do you finance these things? What are the questions that the city managers and the mayors and councils have? And how do we address those questions? Or even if they don't have the right questions, aren't asking those right questions, let's get those questions in front of them and get them thinking about how they address those, and give them the details and knowledge about how to go about doing that.
this is our third summit.
Second.
Well, we had the one in Paso Robles, right, and then we had
It's the second one local, but yeah, you're right, we've got a couple up north.
If you had all three of those back to back, can you imagine the conveyance of information that we could get across? And I think that each one of those has important parts, but we haven't really connected those together to each other either. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that continuity to come from, like when Zach Friend from Santa Cruz spoke at that first one, to the second one, Jackie Irwin, to this latest one. There's a lot of the components that need to be put together there.
My takeaway from the program, the event, I thought that was great. The speakers were great. I thought all of the topics were great, but they didn't connect with one another. I mean, I think we all knew that there was a broad stage and foundation that they all were connected on, but they didn't. They were by themselves individual things that were going on. It wasn't, okay, how do we bring all these resources together to make it work in your community? So we heard from Scenic, and we heard from Caltrans, and we heard from a city, and we heard from a consultant, but it wasn't a cohesive kind of thing. We heard obviously a lot about transportation, but how do all those things work together, and how do you bring together the infrastructure that enables all of that? And I think we need to go back to, we've got to build something as a core infrastructure before we can start doing all those great things like intelligent transportation. Although it does have a role in that we can get transportation money, but that's just about it. So smart city and transportation can lure people in, but without telling them how to build something, then we're just giving them a vision of the future that they won't participate in.
Is that something Sasha could be tasked with? Is helping us define that kind of process way?
Maybe. I'm wondering at the highest level, if we need to rebrand this. You know, because this group got started with CPUC funding with the moniker of Broadband, we call it Broadband. You know, it's a Broadband Summit. But when the way Jory's describing it, I'm seeing it more as a Smart City Summit. It's much bigger than broadband. I mean, yes, broadband is that underlying infrastructure, but why? Yeah. You know, it really is about technology, it's about applications, it's about everything that broadband allows you and enables and connects. And you don't understand the imperative for broadband until you see that bigger why. And you know, I wonder if we ought to start thinking about our local smart city summits versus our local broadband summits, just so people recognize if they want to have a smart city. And John, you're the city councilman among us. I mean, would that, in terms of branding and identity, would that help or go far in terms of your council?
You know, it's funny that broadband is something that is like a word that you just react to, and you know, okay, this is important. Smart city, I even had this discussion with you. What's a smart city? So I guess I don't want to confuse things, but
would you like some coffee? Anybody like some coffee?
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, extra caffeine.
Yeah, I don't know if we ran a smart city unless it was, you know, smart city broadband. What brought me here was hearing about the broadband consortium just has a ring to it, so I don't know. I don't know what everyone else thinks.
Yeah.
Well, I still think broadband, you know, it has a place. I think it's because it's what's necessary for all the other things. And smart city is just an element, or should I say a byproduct of investing in broadband. And we've got to get the cities to tie their networks together, to be tied together through service provider networks, or to be tied together through third-party partners such as other government agencies such as Caltrans, water utilities, electric utilities, or transportation. I think broadband still fits, but you could have an emphasis on non-smart city, it's your next one if that's what you wanna do, but you still have to get the audience to understand that you don't get smart city until you pass go. And the go line is develop a broadband infrastructure.
Hi, this is Lexi. Can I add a quick comment?
Sure.
I want to echo what was just said. I was just at a Shelby conference in Washington, D.C. last week, so unfortunately I wasn't able to make our conference, but they did a really good job on making broadband still the focus and framing it as the infrastructure needed for smart cities. So from a branding perspective, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think it can be both, whether it be infrastructure for smart cities. I don't know the right title offhand, but I don't think it needs to be one or the other.
And I think that we still need to focus on what we accept as speeds and access and those kind of things, and that is broadband.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when we go to smart cities, we're kind of saying that we've satisfied the need.
Good point.
When we've just really, barely placated the need.
I think the point is, in what you're saying, excuse me, Bill, is we need to walk them to it, right? So you can't just present things that are out there, and there's no path to get there. Or you say, yeah, that would be nice, but what are the steps to get there, right? So I liked your point about maybe we need to have more breakouts where we're talking about how to bring people together. Maybe we need to have breakouts about why broadband is important, and then the end goal being smart cities, or something like that. But
Yeah.
there's something around this that I think we're circling around that is important, because just presenting, here are the possibilities, doesn't give anyone a path, and those people have to go back to their city council and explain it to them and convince them, here is what we're trying to do, and again, the layperson is just saying, what are the benefits to the city? What are we shooting for? So there has to be kind of a path.
I agree.
I mean, I've seen some consortiums put together, like breakout sessions, how to write an RFP for a master plan. I mean, something very practical with that. How to select a GIS company to help you with your, with collecting your assets, or a transportation, a traffic signal company to help gain access to your asset information, and then how to record that document in GIS and how to manage that ongoing, so you can sustain the effort. Those kinds of practicums become key in developing the can-do or how to do.
I like the term you use, the blueprint, and what comes to mind is developing a blueprint, right? And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but what is sort of the initial mission of the consortium? I mean, under the funding, what was the purpose? Because I didn't realize how much it had to do with connecting cities or something, or is that something you come up with yourself? I've just kind of walked into this thing.
Yeah, our initial focus is to help communities like Cuyama. I mean, it really is rural. CPUC knows that there's hard areas that there's not a business case for. And there's funds to get to those hard areas, and so they fund consortia to go off and try to deal with those hard areas. In doing so, though, what we find is that these providers want to provide gigabit speeds to boron. And so they go $65 a month, and you can get a gigabit if you're one of 800 homes in boron, and yet in the smart cities we can't do that, in the municipal areas, and so that kind of triggers this whole look back in terms of municipalities to, wow, the future really is going to be gigabit speeds, if not more, and so. How do we not only deal with the rural areas, but deal with the municipalities as well? But that's, and I use that caveat every time we have a meeting and say, well, this is what we're being paid to do, our priority areas, but this is really the bigger vision from a regional perspective. It's the overall strategy. Wow.
Yeah, and we were chatting before the meeting, one of the things that when we start looking at something like gigabit speeds, okay, a law was passed last month that I think was very, very important in Sacramento, where the governor signed, and it allows cities to have internet now as a utility. That's a big difference, and that's what we should be, and when I say that, everybody knows Silicon Valley, right? Everybody know where Silicon Beach is?
Yes.
Why can't
Jory.
this be Silicon County? No, in other words, one of the things, and I live in Oxnard, so for me, Oxnard has, a little bit more, but it's Santa Paula, that whole strip.
Yeah.
We've gotta create new jobs, okay? That we can teach the kids how to be doing, and it needs technology. And, the thing that working together is, how do we get this within, where everybody's working together and not every little person every city, I shouldn't say that, wanting to do it on their own. That's where I thought, we as a consortium, as a group, can start bringing,
One of the things I felt, to piggyback on what you're saying, but bring it back to the summit, is we use the word regional an awful lot. I don't know if we did a good job of saying what that means, why it's important, how to do it. I think that there was it really, I don't wanna say it's a buzzword, but I keep telling John and the city, you gotta be part of the region, you gotta be part of the region, you gotta play with the region. Well, that's me talking. I'm not exactly sure how you're interpreting it or what you would tell everybody else about what I'm trying to say. And I don't think we've communicated that. I haven't communicated that well what that means, so.
My observation is that you may be lucky if you have one council member who does think regional.
Yeah.
And I'm a person who's always embraced that, and it's sort of like if one does better, we all do better. No kumbaya here, but having been involved with SCAGs and the California Association of Governments and working with them on the Ventura County Regional Energy Lines, is making those contacts with people. That's important. So for me, yes, I want to seize on Santa Paula's opportunity, but if we can bring Fillmore into the fold at the same time, more power to us,
Yeah.
to everyone.
Sure.
Is gold plating still an obstacle?
In what respect?
It seemed to be that, we were gonna be penalized or shunned if we practice gold plating. Which is the, raising all the boats, is raising the speeds up and everything else, and going beyond what the CPUC expectations are for any area. Right, wasn't that the conundrum?
Yeah, I don't think that anybody, what makes the most business sense at what time? I think there's nothing wrong with a little vision that says, gigabit, standards. But, the end of the question goes, if that's what the standard is going to be, when would that occur?
Yeah.
Is that 3 years from now, 5 years from now? When does it make business sense to be able to, if that's gold plating, I don't know. But I think a lot of political aspects to broadband, and you look at all these other cities, a gigabit vision is, Google is the one that set the standard for that. And a lot of these small providers are coming in here and delivering that. So, I think that's a default minimum. I wouldn't call it gold plating. I just think that that's where technology's gonna go. All of us are looking at that, we're understanding that, we're trying to get there as fast as the business case will allow us to.
I would like to see
I have a proposition. Well, first of all, I have an observation. And don't get me wrong, counties working with cities get very complicated when you've got a large number of cities trying to put together and building anything. It could be even bike shares, or it could be, traffic signal synchronization or whatever. Cities don't always work well together because they have different budgets, different schedules, different councils, and getting agreement and political will is very challenging. But if that's where we are, in the picture there, that's where we are. That is, City of Ventura, City of Oxnard, City of Florence Park, City of Thousand Oaks, Santa Paula, City Valley all recognize the value of broadband, and so does the county. Let's move on, and let's try poking the bear. Why don't we put together an RFP or an RFI and ask service providers, what would the cost be to connect, to create and a county network, and what would the middle mile loop look like? What are those costs? What are the business models for cities to share in those costs? And then option 3 would be, what are the costs for the cities to connect to this regional loop that you would provide directly yourself or through third-party partners, or both models, for the county and for the city. And then at least cities know going forward that they can either participate in a consortium and form a JPA, or move on and just go it alone on their own. And in that discussion, I believe, we're going to drum up a lot of interest from service providers, utilities, and other concerned parties to give cities information about what their individual costs would be if they were to connect to an internet point of presence or two. So they would get comparative samples, and we can even make that part of the RFI. But right now we're sort of watching the city of Ventura and Oxnard go off and do their thing. I understand Moorpark's putting together an RFP so that they're going to go off and do their thing. But what's happening with this broadband county consortium, and how do we start working on that so that the efforts are moving forward in parallel, rather than the cities working in a vacuum?
That's a conversation we probably need to have this next week, Jory. I know Brian Ganley wishes he was going to be here. He's been put on point to answer that question and show some county leadership in terms of the things you're talking about. He intends to do that, but he's just out of town this week. But it's now that the summit is over, answering that question is tough. It really is a very near-term next step. But I like the RFI idea.
A lot of useful information is going to come out of that exercise, but not only that. When you ask the cities to come together and participate, you ask for information like, where are your data centers? Tell us where your computer rooms are. How much of your network has been moved to the cloud? What are your connection points? Tell us your facilities. Where do you think you're going to want to put cameras, Wi-Fi access points, and the like? That's going to facilitate a lot of internal discussions. And if we can then have regular meetings with the IT directors and the public works people, that's really going to, I think, create a lot more interest and energy, as long as the city managers are in line and agree that this is something they all want to do together collectively. And we can have a lunch with them if they have regular lunches. I think we talked about this before last week's event, and I understand that there's a lunch that they have once a month or once a quarter, and if we can make this a topic on their agenda, if there's time would allow for 15 or 20 minutes while they're eating, maybe we could get the political will and get them to buy in and get their public works people and their IT people there.
One of the things that Mike Pettit put together is he's referencing the city manager meeting that happens monthly, but he's also thinking of suggesting quarterly meetings, which might be that similar to the lunch situation, where you would get various, we the consortia would be able to front load topics for a luncheon meeting quarterly, and it would be of the public works and the IT, and it might be, big once for one meeting. How do you do that? And the next meeting might be regional networks. How do you do that? And really focus those meetings on key strategies, regionally speaking, among those folks. So I think that's something to think about this next year, right into our game plan. This is the time that we're kind
I
of,
could help a lot of pro bono presentations. I can help you make that happen.
appreciate that.
I could do all of it, but I won't. I'll do some,
Thanks.
I'll bring in BB&K, the attorneys from BB&K, I'll bring in Gail, to do some of the policy work. I'll bring in Dave Daigle to do some of the infrastructure discussion. I mean, I can pull together, I think I can pull together the resources, working with you, Bill, to really create a good program for them.
Okay.
Anyway, I thought.
Yeah. Focusing back on the event, I don't feel like we tackled the urgency issue this time.
I don't believe you did either.
Near as much as we did the previous time.
I think the event as a standalone was an interesting event. It had some interesting topics relevant to OTT type services on top of the broadband. And it necessitates the idea of why broadband's important. However, I don't think that we adequately quantified the economic drivers behind the need for broadband and why the city should invest and where the return on investment is for each individual city. I think the county needs to take a real leadership role on the regional aspect of it and bring the cities in full circle under a master plan type county umbrella. I think it was sort of a missed opportunity to cut at whatever time, 11:30, 12:30, as people didn't have a chance to interact or network. And further, I don't think that the sessions were interactive enough where we had great audience participation to keep them engaged. I think it was more of a we're speaking down to you event. Lastly, my observation was that everybody was sitting in their individual silos and not interacting on a regional basis. So, I think perhaps it could be a longer event, a full day event. And I believe that the goal should be portraying the economic value to each individual city and why they should participate.
That's a tall order. I mean, I agree with you, but, last year, nobody left. And I think that there was some atrophy the last hour or so of this year's event, more of the same, perhaps. I heard this last year, whatever the rationale being, we started getting some people that were drifting away and going on to something. Because last year, I clearly felt like we said this is important and everybody believed it was important.
Yep. Is it possible to have a luncheon afterwards where at least
The
there's
keynote speaker, maybe.
that socialization?
Yeah.
That people wanted, not running out.
Luncheon with a capstone speaker and then let people go.
The feedback I received from some of the people who I've spoken with after the event is everybody's kind of waiting on Magellan now, where Magellan's engaged in their feasibility studies. And until they have that return in 3 months, 6 months, wherever it is, there's no centric vision because the people who have engaged with Magellan are waiting for that feedback.
So the ball's not in their court, basically.
Well, they're deflecting, sure. The comments with my efforts, the city managers are reluctant to put forth a policy to councils to vote on without these feasibility studies. Either one, they don't understand it, they don't understand the value, or they don't understand the cost implications or the return on investment. And that was a very interesting comment that a former city manager made to me. What's the return on investment for the city? And conversely, I say, why would a carrier want to invest in a municipality when we're unable to quantify the economic value of that capital investment? And I don't think that none of that is being adequately portrayed.
Yeah. I thought Mike Pettit's Route 66 was compelling, you know, if
Absolutely,
you don't make those investments, you can see what's gonna happen to your community.
absolutely.
But you sure can't take that to the bank.
It comes down to economics.
Yeah, here and now and next council meeting.
How is it gonna create more jobs? How is it gonna create more tax revenue for each individual municipality or the county?
And where's the money gonna come from?
Well, absolutely.
I'm also a bit ambivalent about the transportation mix that we had in here. You know, I felt it was interesting information, but it didn't necessarily, other than it was high-tech and technology focused, and yeah, broadband is buried in it somewhere. Yeah, it was a little bit of a distraction.
I thought it was fantastic myself, but
Okay.
that's because of other things I'm working on.
Yeah.
So, but that's me looking at this a little bit differently now.
It was
More
interesting.
focused on IoT and smart city.
I would have been more interested perhaps looking at how you could go to dig once along Caltrans roads and, you know, along our local thoroughfares with fiber and making them not only asphalt corridors, but fiber corridors. That would have been an interesting discussion.
You know, this is also about timing.
I was a little concerned about some of the messages that maybe people walked away with. Lewis confused the heck out of me. He almost, I think he left the audience feeling that Scenic is available for them. They just need to find a creative way to get under the radar. And I'm really not sure that's a message that we want to be giving everybody, because I don't believe it's realistic.
That was his message.
So if people are now saying, well, our problems will be solved, let's just join Scenic, that's a disservice to the event, and it's really gonna get him in trouble. And it's gonna, I think, hold up a lot of things until we can get people to understand that that's really not the case.
Can someone summarize or recap, kind of what was said by Lewis that came across that way?
I think that Lewis did a good, for those people that didn't understand what Scenic was or does, he had slides that gave just the stats of the libraries connected, where the fiber runs, schools connected, and then some of the research is being done, some of the university partnerships, some of the stuff that, you know, that you guys are working on, Lexi. And it was basically sending the message that we started with schools, we expanded to libraries, and we're going off and doing all of these other things that may or may not be related. And, you know, how do you kids get their homework done, and, you know, the broader interest for the community at large. You know, and he didn't spend a lot of time saying we're powered off of E-rate. And that really is a limiting factor of what communities can do. You know, not everybody can have access to E-rate dollars and E-rate fiber, and you know, E-rate doesn't pay for all things, and you know, that's, I think that I'm still trying to wrap my head around the limitations of Scenic and what and how that business model works, and so yes, he did a great job. He's a visionary. He's a futurist. He does a great job of communicating how his organization is evolving and adapting and changing, but it can't be all things to all people. And I think that there are limitations that really weren't talked about at all.
You do understand that Scenic is a carrier, they're a reseller, so they're competing against every carrier that's trying to invest in these communities.
Yeah. Well,
With public money.
With public money.
Public money.
They're a quasi-government organization with a nonprofit status.
I'm sorry.
Someone from the audience asked the question more directly, and the answer wasn't direct. It wasn't, you have to qualify for E-rate to use the money. It was really a fuzzy answer.
So I guess, is that where the discrepancy comes in, that he wasn't directly, I'm still not really hearing making the connection to the first statement that was brought up. I apologize because I wasn't there, but that's just a bold statement, so I wanted to better understand what was so negative about his presentation.
There was unfortunately, nothing negative about his presentation. It was a little misleading that people could have understood him to say that that now it seemed like it was a progression, like Scenic wanted to address schools, universities, and then schools, and then we brought on libraries. And I think you talked about two other examples, that they brought on some nonprofit organizations, and then it was kind of like, well, what's next? And we're contemplating what's next, and it almost gave the audience an understanding that they were looking at new opportunities to fund new models, which could include government, and that's what was, I think, confusing for the audience.
And you can see his presentation on the link that you
Yeah.
guys provided, so I mean, it was only a 15-minute presentation. I watched it online since I wasn't able to be there, but.
Has anybody gone back
Okay,
and
I'll
watched
have
it
to go back.
again in mass?
Not the whole thing, no, but
Yeah, it'd be
And
interesting to go back.
you didn't include the elected officials in the front end, or is that a different?
No, there's
section?
two parts to it.
Oh, there's two, okay, I saw the second part.
Yeah, well, that's at the podium.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the second part.
Morning. So, I think we've completed our discussion related to the broadband forum this last Thursday. We'll go ahead and move into the next portion of the discussion, just giving you several updates, and if there's other discussion that we want to have as far as we go, we can do that. So, Bruce was asking, about this Caltrans. There was a flurry of dust this last couple of weeks, and emails started showing up from Sacramento, and everybody, there was a meeting that was called. Greg, I think you were in that meeting, and you can fill in the backstory, but Caltrans convened a lot of folks. CETF was part of that conversation, as was CPUC.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I asked the question, what are the critical routes within the state that would be strategic for fiber? And so what we ended up doing is responding to that. Sonny McPeak with CTF started writing all the consortia and saying, give us your inputs, and they started organizing amongst themselves. So we did that for Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo counties. And it basically ended up being, our inputs were the state highways. It was 33, 126, 118, going through the backcountry, the 23, 150, Santa Paula and Ojai. I mean, if you think about those as, next time they do a dig in those particular areas to be able to put fiber in some of those areas, it's like, why haven't we done it already? This is kind of a no-brainer. But, so these were our inputs, and we went on up the coast and got concurrence from Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo areas, and we went right through Cuyama in terms of the recommendations we provided. But, Greg, I didn't have the benefit of that being on that phone call. Is there anything that you'd add that I didn't, in terms of why they're doing it? I think that there's a new gas tax money or something that.
There seems to be different motivations. I think the timing, I think the disasters that have occurred, there's a lot of impetus that have changed their thought process on how they did their work and who was allowed to be involved in those decision making. When they said they wanted those corridors, they didn't define it or restrict it to anything. They just said what would be important to you, and so we identified these as important to us, putting everything out there with the thought that they could knock things out if they didn't like it, but if we didn't submit it, they wouldn't even be considered. So, better to give too much than too little.
Were you under the impression that they were going to start working into a work plan, or, I mean, is this just a wouldn't it be nice list, or what's
No,
it?
this does seem to have a goal. Caltrans is working on what they consider to be a dig once mechanism, but they don't expect that to be ready for another 4 years. Wow. Yeah, so, it's aspiration and reality colliding, but at least they're now they have the correct aspirations, it seems, and getting the Edisons and the railroads and everybody to try to start opening up about what their goals are and where their assets are, seem to be the underlying motivation for the meeting. So,
So who are these stakeholders? These are all state?
These are all state agencies.
State
Caltrans, I was involved with some conversations up in Santa Barbara, and you look at the one-on-one improvements that have been going on through Santa Barbara and just north. The behemoth bureaucracy was such that, I mean, nobody wanted to talk about conduit, you know, and partnerships. I mean, it was a beast unto its own self, and you couldn't find a door to knock on and have that conversation. And then in the last year or so, Sacramento in general got beat up pretty badly about its own stovepipes. You know, you had AB 1665, and yet you have all these agents, and this is where I think Scenics coming in, trying to be the white knight to try to integrate Sacramento's thinking. You know, when you have Caltrans that's doing its thing, and you had public safety, and you know, and they were looking at fairgrounds for fiber, and you have other agencies somewhere else in education and scenic, and I mean, all these players are off creating their own broadband strategies, or something. They're all trying to say, who's got the lead in terms of creating this, you know, shared infrastructure for municipalities, the state overall, and then you get into the regions, and then you get into the cities.
and to that end, there was 3 or 4 consortia represented.
Right.
So they're trying to integrate what we're doing, so that everybody can be on the same page. Lexi, she was on that call as well. Was there anything that she?
Yeah, Lexi, you guys have been spending more time up in Sacramento than probably a lot of us. I mean, would you add anything to who's on first up there?
Who's on first and who's taking the lead in the strategy? Sorry, could I have a more specific question? I did physically attend that meeting.
Yeah, did you get anything out of why Caltrans is asking the question and what's their action plan, other than we're just collecting data for them at this point?
Yeah, sure. In my statement, I'll be blunt about it. Caltrans in that meeting essentially was a glorified punching bag. They were there, you know, and people just bragged on them left and right, and their position was very clear. You guys can keep talking all you want, but nothing's going to happen for 10 plus years with their system. Kind of my takeaway from the event was their part in all of this is very, very, very long term. There's nothing that's going to come from anything in their department in the short term. So as a company, I know we're going to be focusing our efforts elsewhere, just simply because we're looking for immediate changes.
Yeah.
So.
That's good feedback. Good feedback. And it kind of echoes perceptions that are current. So that's the Caltrans update, and I would venture to say nothing is going to happen in the near term. Let's move on to talk about municipality roadmap. And what I wanted to do more than anything at this point was just provide you little updates. We're still looking at meetings in Simi Valley November 1st, looking at 6 or 7 companies at this point in time that have said they're interested in participating. What I'll be doing is sending out I can send it out to all of you. I'll do it on Monday. There's a great document that Brian Gabler, the Economic Development Director, put it together, 167 pages in total. And a lot of it's the stuff that we've generated. But it went to City Council, and it'll be a good read-ahead document for those companies that are going to be involved. It talks about neighborhoods that are important to them and what they're trying to do, and it kind of, I had heard very little coming from them in the last year or so, but obviously they've been busy at work, and their heads have been down, and they've been generating all kinds of strategies, and I'll share that with you on a Monday miss of it this next week. It's good stuff, a lot of good stuff about what they have, where they're at, what they want to do, where they got to go, and it's good for the providers to have in advance of those meetings. John, you want to give us any more Santa Paula update? Maybe the parts of your speech that you didn't get around to?
It was kind of a rush. I can't think of anything offhand. I wish I could. Kind of during the headlines right now.
November 7th is when we're gonna give an update to your council.
Yes. we got postponed.
Right.
So, no, nothing particularly new. I'd almost have to look at my notes, because I was so rushed, I couldn't remember I don't remember what I included when I didn't, so. Yeah.
I think the big plan for this next year, and I'm sorry you're retiring from council duties, but it is probably getting into, talking about community networks and economic development and digital literacy programs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is like, I was trying to say that, this is more of a work in progress, and I'm kind of navigating this thing as I go. And I like, what you said about developing a blueprint, because this is what we're doing, and I wasn't aware of all, things that all the other cities are doing either. So that's gonna be a good education for me. And when I talk about a regional approach, it doesn't mean that we don't, we all act together like a JPA or something, but be generous in sharing our experiences in terms of how we navigate these things. That's what I'm thinking, and I see that a lot. Politically, people can be very much in silos, but I used to go to, planning, the city planners, monthly meeting, and they get together and share, their experiences and how they do things, so. It's kind of like the difference between politics and scientists, on an international scale, they share things and they have a common interest, but, politics is different.
Paul, this would be a good time to introduce Cuyama.
Yes, Cuyama is a small rural agriculture area in northeast Santa Barbara County. It's kind of at the four counties intersection of Kern, San Luis Obispo, Ventura, and Santa Barbara counties. We have no infrastructure for broadband other than I was the school superintendent up there after having spent some time in Santa Paula, and I was really concerned because there was no little or no internet access for the students. And so I started off about 4.5 years ago writing a grant, and eventually did bring in broadband service for the school district under a Department of Education grant. And my goal was to expand it to the entire valley, and some challenges. My first project, as I said, took from the time I got the grant till it was built out about 3.5 years. And there's just no infrastructure. There's absolutely no fiber there. Everything comes into the valley by microwave, including the local telephone system, which is owned by Frontier now. So it's also am involved with rural economic development nonprofit that's based up there, and it's near impossible to attract businesses if you have no adequate broadband service, which we don't. And so one of my goals, continuing to do work up there, I'm an elected, I'm the president of the Cuyama Community Services District, which is literally the only, we act as a municipality up there. There's no other government agencies other than the County of Santa Barbara, and there's one other newly formed water district specifically having to do with SGMA, or the Groundwater Stabilization Act. And so my goal is to bring broadband services, however I may do that, to the Cuyama Valley for business and local residents. We don't, the census data is is non-existent. The 2010 census kind of collapsed up there, so nobody really even knows how many people live there. You can see, if you look around, you'll find numbers all the way from 850 to about 8,000. And so that's, my guess is somewhere around the 2,500, based on the size of the school district, of which I was superintendent. The school district itself is a small school district, but large area, 726 square miles, with about 230 students spread out, dispersed all throughout the valleys, the canyons and the mountains. And so it's a challenge. And so
Do you fly back and forth or drive or how?
I drive over the 33. I'm trying to envision putting fiber on that road. It's a challenge. I drive back and forth. I have a home up there, and I live the rest of the time in Thousand Oaks, Newbury Park. So I go back and forth.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
When you were doing the grant for the school, obviously you were considered about satisfying that need, but was there any consideration at that point about the greater need?
Absolutely.
And how was that addressed and what was the response?
Well, that grant was specifically for schools, but what I did is I was able to attract another partner in the process, and we had eventually built a 165-foot tower, which has a couple dishes on it, but we over-engineered it, and it's engineered for about 7 dishes. And so that is available. The school, I still work closely with the school district, and that really is, other than fiber, for microwave, that's the way, we actually leased fiber we get our service from City Center Bakersfield, and we leased fiber from City Center Bakersfield to Maricopa, built a tower in Maricopa, leased tower space on a hilltop, and did 1 hop over.
Is there any revenue generation that's coming out of that?
There isn't yet, but there could be, and that's my goal.
Right.
For the school district. It's a high poverty school district, very needy, a very needy place.
Underserved, yeah.
Very underserved in many ways.
Interesting.
And so yes, we did think of that, and we do have the capability to bring in additional service, but I think the goal would be fiber, but in the interim, if somebody wants to put broadband in there with microwave, I'd be happy to do that.
Are the homes unserved? Do they all got dish network, or how are they homes connected?
The home connections are, there is satellite, we can get satellite anywhere primarily. It's, pretty poor service and it's expensive. And, 4G, that's what everybody uses. That's what I use. I have my little hotspot, and that's it. But the service is poor. It's really congested certain times of the day.
Sure.
It's just unreliable. And it's not true true broadband. So I'm willing to work with anybody to help achieve that goal and not only help the business development, but the community and the schools and provide better service. When I was listening to this, I did an interview with Education Week in 1998, I looked it up, which was about 20 years ago, talking about bringing internet service to a school in the Central Valley, which I did in 1997, 98 timeframe, and I called it the Great Equalizer, and it's an equity issue, and it's odd that I'm sitting here 20 years later having that same conversation with just a different area.
The thresholds.
Some things don't change. The thresholds have changed.
Sounds like Ventura.
Thresholds have changed, but the needs haven't.
Right.
Not pertinent really to the discussion, but is Cuyama split between Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, or maybe even Kern?
It's the Cuyama, what's considered the Cuyama Valley is in all 4 counties.
North would be
Kern, San Luis Obispo, Ventura, and Santa Barbara. The school district it doesn't go into Kern. It goes in. It has area in Ventura, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara counties.
And I've mentioned how you found fiber with the SCE, and then you said you're actually what's the provider?
PG&E. And I have experience with. I was a board member with the Imperial Valley Telecommunications Authority for 4 years back in 2004 to 2008, and we had built an entire fiber network using the local electric provider, which is an Imperial Irrigation District, and shared poles, and so I was part of that group, many years ago. So I've been doing this for a while, primarily centered around school. I worked with CNIC before it was CNIC, when it was the DCP, Digital California Project, starting in about 1991.
Was the grant gotten through scenic?
The grant was not through scenic, it was through the K-12 high-speed network. which kind of overlays with scenic.
Got
It's a separate network, but it's connected to scenic.
So Paul reached out to us and I got real excited, and, you know, we've been in business for several years now, and yet we didn't know who to talk to, you know, and he found us, and I'm thrilled to death, because it's been the kind of the poster child for what we're all about, the rural area.
Be quite a model to create.
Yeah, if we don't do anything other than figure out, you know, how to come in how many different ways with how many different partners to do something really spectacular there, I mean, that really will show our value as a consortium. And so we wanna spend some, you know, thank you for coming, we wanna spend a lot of time with you in terms of addressing those needs.
And the needs are not just us, the county of Santa Barbara has facilities out there, the Forest Service has facilities out there. And they don't have service either, so.
So who have you talked to in Santa Barbara? Cox? I mean, who are the providers that you talked to in Santa Barbara? Or have you?
No, I have not been able to generate interest. Digital West.
Digital West is on.
Digital West, Tim, I've spoken to him, GeoLinks, a little bit of conversation with GeoLinks.
I have a question for everyone, just because of, speaking of funding and an upcoming deadline, is the big wave for funding deadline on everyone's radar in this consortium?
Probably not, Lexi.
Okay, it's coming up, this October 26th, so it's right around the corner, and it's specifically for, giving funding to rural schools for internet. I'm more than happy to send you the details, Bill, if that would be of interest.
Yeah, I just saw it for the first time, you know, come across the email a couple of days ago, or maybe even the end of last week, but I had never seen it before, and I don't know the details. It'd be great to have that. And once again, I can.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and send that.
Yeah, can you give us cliff notes? It's K through 12, right?
Correct. You know, I'm not in front of it
Yeah.
as we speak, so, but I can dig in my email and I'll forward it to you guys right after this call.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
You know, it's jumping ahead just a little bit, but, we have aspirations of building a new website for the consortia. And I think that it will be a much greater resource tool for everybody going forward. Information, mapping, best practices, you know, things to keep on the radar, news and events, that kind of thing.
Yep. Let's jump ahead and talk briefly about regional networks. I'll give you an update, and Jory, if you want to chime in, you know, with your thoughts or any updates you have, we can do that, but then we'll do the roundtable, and that'll run our meeting. In talking to Brian Ganley, you recall the map on the right. That's a map that Mike Pettit put together, and one of the realizations as he envisioned a regional network was county facilities. And as Brian and I started putting the pieces back together, what this looks like, it came back to county facilities. And we said, well, wait a minute, that's not anchor institutions. Anchor institutions are schools, they're county, they're city, they're, you know, hospitals, I mean, you name it, there are all kinds of different organizations. Do we even have an anchor institution map? And I don't think we, you know, I start asking the question and I get the same answer. Silence. And so we've never done this before. You know, it came to, you know, we're gonna start. We're gonna be looking at all the schools and all the municipalities. We're gonna be looking at all the where city halls are and what those, and I know Jory's already naturally doing this with the analysis he's doing in the communities he's working in, but we're gonna do it regionally for all the other municipalities as well. And then we'll coordinate it with each of the municipalities as a way to validate it. We're gonna basically take a map and say, you know, here's the schools, libraries, key institutions that we think of are your anchor institutions. Do you agree? Have we missed any? Would you take something off? But, you know, we wanna basically create this list. And when we talk about an anchor institution network, here are the nodes of that network we're talking about. And get real and explicit about, you know, this is what it looks like and these are the organizations and the buildings we're trying to connect. And so, it was an epiphany a couple of weeks ago to realize that we hadn't done this before. And then now Sasha, this is what he's working on. He's sick this morning, he got a cold. But he's already started that list, and I expect within the next week to 10 days, he'll be reaching out to the various cities and saying, here are the lists that we've compiled on your behalf. You wanna add to it, and do you agree with it? And hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to share with you all of the complete list of our regional anchor institutions.
Okay, as a layman, I have to ask the question, how you define an anchor institution? What does that mean in the context of broadband? I mean, are these institutions that somehow you can tap into, literally, into their fiber networks or something? I'm not getting that. I'm not connecting the dots.
It's a good question, and I will take the action to research it. Because I'm sure that there is a definition, a legislative definition. But I've heard the term from day one, and I know that people at CPUC look at these terms, the whole idea, and maybe Jory can add to the definitions. I know notionally what they are and what they consist of, but I don't know the legislative significance of why everybody wants to start there with this anchor institution network. George, you say you want to add to it, or?
From discussions I've had, the anchor institution has been considered on a commercial aspect, where they're paying a bill on a monthly recurring basis to connect that facility to broadband.
Okay.
So
But it's also a level of community service and benefit as well, these institutions.
Yes, without a doubt.
Utilities, schools, service
Libraries,
agents,
hospitals.
public service, police stations.
Yeah, we've
City
been
Hall.
working with CETF lately to identify anchor institutions within our service area.
And
But
it-
and that list includes, libraries, schools, boys and girls clubs, those type of institutions. So I think the actual definition of what constitutes an anchor institution is probably interpretive, but it's supposed to be, established services such as schools and libraries. They don't move; they're going to stay there, and
Yeah, well, and I've heard more in terms of retail, like for instance, you might have a new development and an anchor.
Right.
Anchor store might be your
Now, this is something
your
completely
Target or
different.
your something like that, but that sounds like it might be, similar in the fact that they pay, like as George said, they kind of pay the bills, they bring the customers in, and then it benefits others that are in the same.
It's about justification, return on investment,
Yeah.
to see if they want to interconnect into a proprietary network or a bigger network that can be public or private partnership. But the idea is there a savings built in by doing that for the institution?
Yeah, if we lit up
may
all
have a
these,
definition for what they're
Yeah, it's a good request.
Yeah, I wasn't even asking about a legal definition, which you brought up, there might be something.
No,
In terms of funding, no, I just kind of, in general, what it meant.
There's been all kinds of requests for anchor institution lists, and, what anchors need to be connected, and it's a notional buzzword. But I think the definition, there is probably a definition out there that we need to be.
Costco is probably not a,
Yeah.
although they would claim they were.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Like-
I think a lot of people would say.
Yeah.
In Ventura County, they use this INET network.
Yeah.
And on there are the police and fire stations, and Mike Bennett is considered those anchor institutions for INET.
So if we lit those anchor institutions up with 5G, let's say, would that benefit the neighborhoods around them, or would it just be specific to those anchor institutions?
Well, first of all, let me just add to the definition of an anchor institution. So a police and a fire station typically is looked at as a municipal facility, and not as an anchor institution. When municipal entities form municipal fiber networks, they typically assume that all city facilities that are part of their city charter are going to be included and be connected to the municipal network. Anchor institutions typically are institutions that are anchors within the community. So they provide a public service or nonprofit service to the community much like the municipality does. So they're not looked at as companies that are for profit. They're looked at, even though they make a profit in many cases, they're looked at as organizations that are there for the benefit of the community. So they're hospitals, academic institutions, 501c3 nonprofits, social service agencies, and referral sites, Meals on Wheels, senior elder care centers, youth centers, and those kinds of things. Organizations that serve a particular constituency, disadvantaged in one way or another, and so cities kind of see them as our community doesn't function well without them. So they're community anchors. We have to have them, and we have to do whatever it is that we should do to support them. And so cities typically look at them differently than they do from a business or the private sector that is in the broadband arena for making a profit. Interestingly, someone made the mention that anchor institutions not only are just that, but they're also anchors. So in business models for broadband, municipalities look at anchor institutions as being those institutions that they think will connect to their municipal network and anchor the investment and will provide the revenue to offset the cost of construction of the network. And then in that case, they become anchors for the network. So there's this, and there's probably some other definitions floating around when it comes to financing and things of that sort. But from a broadband perspective, that's what community anchors do. So they don't have networks themselves, typically, except for, it might be if a municipality has an electric utility, or there are electric co-ops within the region. California doesn't have a whole lot of electric co-ops, but if there are electric utilities, municipal electric utilities or electric co-ops, they could become anchor institutions. So they're not part of the city charter, again, but they can be an anchor in that they will use the service and or they will contribute to the construction of the network for everyone to benefit from. So we see that a lot in municipalities that have electric utilities really have a leg up, so to speak. We also think about municipalities that have a traffic signal system with fiber in the ground, with conduit interconnect, also have a leg up, especially those that have a electric utility definitely do. Many communities that have a water utility, they are anchor institutions as well, and in the advancement of water mains and the implementation of AMI technology for utility meter reading, et cetera, and for pumps and valves and meters for SCADA, for water chemistry and pressures and all those things, for power, for water and for power. They become all very much included in the anchor institution discussion. So it's a mixed bag. You could also throw in regional transportation partners in that they are anchors, and that without them you wouldn't have transportation within your communities. You might even have a municipality with its own transportation organization. Many do. Santa Monica does, Culver City does, and there are other models as well.
The Office of Ratepayer Advocates out of the PUC uses the term, instead of anchor institutions, as CTF eligible institutions.
CTF eligible.
Yeah, so California Teleconnect Fund eligible institutions.
Yeah.
So again, the definition can fluctuate depending on the audience.
So to your point, John, when we go and provide you with a list,
Yeah.
we'll have a definition at the top, and we'll say, we think that with this criteria, these are the organizations in your community that meet that criteria. and ask you to validate, yeah, to that criteria, we've got them all.
Right, and so it was not that they had a certain level of fiber access at the time, it's just that they might be ones, sounds to me like it's most any organization that has a number of stakeholders.
Yeah.
In a given community, whether it be, like I said, boys and girls club or whatever, it's just something of
Community
public
service.
significance.
Public significance.
People who really like the younger list of anchor institutions typically are economic development corporations. So I definitely would go to the EDC and ask them what they have. Dun & Bradstreet also is a good source for anchor institution information, if you have access to Dun & Bradstreet as well.
Good idea, good point. Okay. So that's the agenda. Do we have any, let's go around the table if there's any updates that people want to provide, any questions, anything we've missed, and then we'll adjourn. Any updates from the room here?
This is Lexi, so I found the email with the grant information if anyone is interested.
Okay.
I did send it to you as well.
Yeah, why don't you forward it to me and then I'll just take it and put it on this meeting announcement and resend it so everybody will have it that's attending the meeting.
Okay, great, yeah, and just to reaffirm that date in everyone's head, October 26th is the deadline, so it is something that needs to be acted on very quickly.
Okay, great, thank you for sharing. Any other announcements? On the phone?
I would just like to say, thank you for recording the meeting for those of us that weren't able to attend in person, because I got a lot out of just being able to watch it. And unfortunately, you can't be two places at the same time. And I was in Charlotte, North Carolina during the conference, but I was really interested in seeing the presentation. Thank you.
You know, the interesting thing, and Paul and I got associated with education, and this is really what it's come down to, is that people don't have to be around. In fact, if we wanted to put up there, we could have people calling in Skype and they could actually be part of what we're doing. So it's taking the technology. The beauty that I have found is that if you wanted to go see last year's summit, you can go back and see it. That's the beauty of what this new technology is really all about. I appreciate your time.
Jory, any update on the street light discussion?
Yeah, actually, right after this call, we're meeting with the Energy Coalition, a nonprofit. We met with the CalSLA, the Streetlight Association, and they're supporting our efforts. The Energy Coalition is supporting our efforts. We're going to be preparing a couple documents for cities. So a heads up to the cities, and maybe get this into the notes, that the city of Oxnard, Keith Brooks, is going to take the lead in preparing a document for either, well, for cities to discuss whether or not it'll be a resolution adopted by their representative councils, supporting the acquisition or reopening of the program for the acquisition of Southern California edits polls by municipalities. We've got we have 4 cities in Ventura County, along with the county, that are interested thus far. Last week we spoke with Helen Cox of the city of Thousand Oaks, and she's on board as well. I've got a list of 7 other cities that are interested outside of the county of Ventura. And after the call with the Energy Coalition today, Craig Perkins, the director, and myself, we're going to take the lead on reaching out to our assembly members, and we're going to go political with this. We're going to want to get their backing if we can. And again, Oxnard's taking the lead when it comes to getting the cities on board. We are going to need to start to get an education and communications plan together for the cities, so that they fully understand what's at stake, what the value of the polls are for energy conservation, and for savings, for smart street lighting implementation through LED, after the LED conversion, and also what the impacts might be in their leveraging poles while negotiating small cell license agreements and subsequent encroachment joint trench agreements with the cellular industry from the rollout of 5G.
Okay, I have a question, and Jerry, I'm glad you brought that up because I brought it up to my city manager in Public Works. What I'm not clear on, is this an effort to reopen that program, or that program is gonna open and then you need a coalition for what purpose?
This is an effort to push Edison to reopen the program. Yeah.
Okay, and
They're not going to do it willingly.
okay. I imagine Santa Paula isn't on that list yet, right?
Not yet, no.
Okay, how do we get on that list?
We're gonna be, well, you're on the list now.
Okay.
And we'll be sending further communications to you, along with the cities that have already opted in and the cities that we're still hoping will opt in. So there'll be a lot more information coming to you, and hopefully you'll see something from us on a weekly basis. This is going to be a 1.5 to 2 year effort.
Okay, well, I'll talk to Bill offline as far as how I get that info.
All right, guys, I didn't deliver an early departure, I regret that, but it was a great conversation, and I thank you all for coming, and both last week and this week, and the meeting stands adjourned.